Hi, Ibn. How are you doing today?
Hey, good, Gabriel. How are you? Nice background there. You're doing a lot of reading, I can see.
All the time? Yeah, I do like reading actually. So it is pretty, a well-suited background.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm pretty chuffed having you here today because um, although you're a software and product developer and team leader from way back, just looking at your background, you've done some interesting stuff for both national and multinational businesses that provide services to customers, like Downer, AGL, Webjet, CPA Australia, big guys. But you've also done work for large-scale software providers like Nintex and Microsoft. So you've got a pretty broad range of experience here. So thanks for doing this, first of all.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
um, there's one that jumped out at me when I was looking through your background, and it was the work you did for CPA Australia recently, and it had to do with um, building and monitoring and looking after applications in Azure, but also applications outside of Azure, but inside sort of that hybrid environment. So just before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about what that project was for. So I know there was something to do with chartered accountants because it's CPA. Well, why don't you walk me through a little bit what was going on there that they needed a little bit of extra help?
Sure. So CPA is running the CPA program, and this is, that's for accountants, and they some sort get certified basically, and they get and pick a few subjects such as accounting and obviously Australian accounting and whatnot. And every now and then laws are changing, so CPAs needs to go through the CPA program, which consists of studying materials that are being sent, so books really are being sent to their address, and then finally taking a physical exam in their country. Because CPAs are also not only based in Australia, some of them are in Southeast Asia or in the US or in Europe. And all this enrollment process is done through a web application. So twice a year, because they have 2 semesters, candidates will go to this website and pick the subjects they need to enroll in, and finally also pick an exam, so a location and a date, because they want, either they want the earliest date to get rid of it or the latest date because they might need more time,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
study.
right. Yeah,
So
that
that's why
that 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 reminds me of study as well. So that must be a lot of load, right? Like if it's one or
especially,
two dates
yeah,
throughout the year.
it's a lot of load at a specific point in time because if you want the better slot, well, you have to come in early. So when on the day, because the day is announced in advance, on the day enrollments will open, well, candidates will sort of flock to the website and say, well, I want these dates. So lots of clicking and obviously they need to pay. And CPA wanted to make sure this would work
Got it.
smoothly and was a good experience. So I was part of a team. We came in, and our goal was to re-platform parts of the system so that we would provide this smooth experience to candidates.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the system now. So you mentioned Azure very briefly before, but was this environment purely in Azure? Where were they in their cloud migration at that point?
I would say CPA was already fairly advanced in their cloud migrations. They were running many services into Azure, and they still are part of the system is, in on-prem. So it's quite common to have sort of these hybrid environments where maybe some core legacy systems are still running on-prem, but you're building new services into Azure. But obviously, both of those services, they need to talk in some ways.
Right. So what
So
did you
that's
use? You had these two systems that weren't necessarily in the same environment. Sort of, how did you monitor them both, or how did you determine where more resources needed to be allocated, given that they were a little bit distinct from each other?
So in terms of communications, in Azure that's done through Express Route, which is a sort of VPN basically between your Azure infrastructure and your on-prem infrastructure. So there's a secure network which allows you to communicate, and everything is locked down. But the problem is, of course, you go and build this code and deploy it and it runs, but you need to know if it works, because you don't want to have your users telling you, oh, by the way, I couldn't enroll. You want to know it.
Right.
You want to know it first.
Yeah.
That's the first key, of good software. You need
Yeah.
to know what's happening. And this is where this whole notion of observability come in, where you not only have logs, but you also have custom business and metrics and events which you emit. So you know what the system is doing at any point in time. And even more so, you know when things that are supposed to happen are not happening. So typically in this case, we expected enrollments, and if we didn't have any, even if we didn't have any errors, this meant something was wrong. So you can alert on collecting those metrics and saying, I expect at least that many to happen over a pretty rolling period, maybe 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, got it. So what did you use for that monitoring?
So we use Application Insights, which is an application performance management system, and also a centralized logging tool. So it's
who makes it?
So that's provided by Microsoft,
Right.
and this is kind of native to Azure. So let's say if you just build a new Azure service, this will come up with it. It's built in, so you get lots of built-in metrics that your database, for example, or your app services will emit into it already out of the box, without you doing kind of any work at all. All you have to do is say, well, give me application insights and turn it on for my app service, for example, and it will just work. And what it does, things such as track your request, collect your logs, you look at your dependencies. So let's say, you build an API and this API depends on a database. This will record all the database calls and tell you, oh, those are the 10 the slowest database calls, for example. So you get all of these nice things, tell you the 5 most common errors, and you can see also, which is great, dependencies between services. So when your API depends from an on-prem service, you can have timing. So it tells you, how much time it takes to go and back from this service and how often it fails.
Right. So this is very interesting then, because monitoring APIs that are implicated in on-prem as well as cloud, I would imagine that would also apply to any virtualized legacy apps that you've integrated as well, right? Because this all hangs together with APIs inside or outside the actual Azure environment. Am I getting it right?
Yes. So we didn't do this at CPA, but it's something I've done in other contexts. Is that Application Insights is not only just for Azure. And a very good case in point is that I've used it in the past on AWS, for example. So there's nothing preventing you to install the agent, let's say when you're running a VM, so you can run, it's just binaries that you're going to install, and it will give you health metrics around the VM, such as CPU, memory, so you can correlate also potentially application issues with hardware issues, because we see if the CPU is spiking, it's very unlikely your application will perform well. So Application Insights brings all of these into one central dashboard, which is also the exciting part, is that you can have a global view of everything, not just what's running in Azure, but all your dependencies outside of Azure too. Being it maybe VMs that you run to host another service or legacy app on-prem, typically in your own data center.
Yeah, wow. So having a consolidated view of everything, there's implications there in the stability and management now of your entire environment, rather than just what's going on specifically in Azure, it sounds like.
Yeah, so it gives also you more power, because traditionally, we had ops which would look after those servers on-prem, and when you would fail, you probably raise a support ticket and you kind of look into their logs, and maybe 3 days later they'll tell you, okay, problem is fixed. But now you can sort of shift and lift those VMs without moving them. So they still run on-prem, but you can have visibility into those VMs straight into what you use to see your other applications running in Azure. And Azure will be launching, Arc, probably in the next few months, which goes even farther than this. So what it does is that you install an agent on the machine, and it will make those resources appear as an Azure resource in your dashboard. So you'll have let's say, 5 VMs running in Australia Southeast in Azure, but you also have 5 VM running in your office in Melbourne, and they will appear in the same dashboard. So you'll be, for compliance, for example, that is amazing, because you can run Azure policies and you know that, oh, well, all the certificates are up to date, the machine has been patched and all these kind of things. So at the moment, you cannot take remediation actions on the machines running on-prem, but at least you can see them, which is already a big step forward.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, I think we're leaking into sort of governance and compliance areas here. And you started mentioning, installing it on VMs and having them appear sort of natively in that same environment or console. So let's talk a little, this seems incredibly powerful already, but let's talk a little bit about price and how the kinds of decisions people will need to make about what they leave on and what they leave off and what everything costs and what this specific product costs as well. Let's maybe tie it up with that.
So one great point about application insight is also the price. First, it is very cheap compared to the competition, but also the way it is priced is that you pay on the ingest. So it's a pricing model that's based on the data that you're collecting from your different systems and being sent to Azure. And you can decide to cut off, different services if maybe the logs have no value or they just emit too much. So that makes it a very easy to adopt and decide, because if you do use another product currently, you quite often know how many logs you're emitting per day. So you can translate this straight away into a price for application insights. That's the first point. And also, you don't get charged on a per VM basis. So it doesn't really matter if you have 5 or 500 VMs. What matters is how many logs they emit. Whereas quite often competitors, they'll base their pricing on VMs. So you'll have a cost per VM. So if you run many underpowered VMs, that is quite common, well, you end up paying a lot more than if you run maybe 2 very powerful VMs. So that makes it a lot easier. You just get to decide, do I need those logs or not?
Yeah, that sounds like a big deal. I know that a lot of companies in the early and sort of mid stages of their cloud journey, they find themselves with a whole bunch of VMs because they've just chucked all the systems that they had on-prem or systems they needed to stabilize or look after into virtual environments because they had to put them somewhere, right? Before
exactly.
Because they couldn't or didn't want to run it on the hardware, the platform was being decommissioned, but then they end up with way more VMs than they ultimately want to get to, but they have to make decisions about cost, and they end up making decisions faster than they would want, or turning stuff off before they're 100% confident, just because it costs so much to manage. So this sounds like it would make that situation a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah, and that's also it's very important to say, I'm not saying, go and migrate everything to Azure today, because it's definitely not a good option. Like for most of the people out there, like they've got licenses quite often, that probably multi-year deals, and some of those things just cannot be migrated or migrated easily. So it's more like looking specifically at each application and systems they're using currently and make an assessment, based on licensing costs, based on the hardware they require to run them, based on their dependencies and whatnot, and see what can be migrated, what can be sometimes replaced, what can be just, lifted in a container, or what can be, just we can find an alternative for it running in the cloud, like, maybe a SaaS product, because sometimes that's also an option. So we've got to look at every single application that's being used and decide, like an assessment basically based on different factors.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, cool. Well, this sounds like good news for a lot of people out there who may not know how useful this particular component of Azure Monitor is, especially if they're not aware that it can be applied across the board and not just to what's already inside Azure. Well, okay, so thanks again for that. Thanks for sharing all that information, and I get a sense that there's a lot more in there that we want to drag out of you, maybe at another another one of these episodes.
Yeah, sure. It was my pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Gabriel. Take it easy.
Thank you, Ivan, and talk to you next time.
Bye.